Our top story begins in Turkey, which has threatened to strike Syrian government forces anywhere if any more of its troops are armed, or harmed, I should say, in Syria. Speaking in Ankara, President Tayyip Erdogan said Turkey will not tolerate any further violations of the truce in Syria. The remarks come after 13 Turkish soldiers were killed in recent clashes in Idlib. Erdogan said the Syrian regime, Russian forces, and Iran-backed militants are committing a massacre in Idlib. He said Ankara is determined to push Syrian forces beyond Turkish posts in the region by the end of this month.
If there is the smallest injury to our soldiers on the observation posts or other places, I am declaring from here that we will hit the regime forces everywhere from today, regardless of the lines of the Sochi Agreement or Idlib.
Well, earlier, the Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said Syrian forces have continued to advance into the last opposition stronghold, in Idlib. Akar said 4 observation posts and 2 military positions are now in Syrian regime-controlled territory. Let's move on now to the U.S., where Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders has won the Democratic presidential primary in the state of New Hampshire. With over 90% of votes counted, Sanders took almost 26% of the vote, with former Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg on just over 24%.
As the U.S. gears up to elect a new president later this year, the Democratic primary is becoming interesting. Bernie Sanders now appears to be leading the Democrats' left-wing liberals, while Pete Buttigieg is leading the moderate centrists. Ex-frontrunners Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren and ex-Vice President Joe Biden finished in 4th and 5th. Both Buttigieg and Sanders have asked for a partial recanvassing of last week's Iowa caucus. Sanders says the New Hampshire win is a milestone on his road to victory against President Donald Trump.
This victory here is the beginning of the end for Donald Trump. We are going to unite together and defeat the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country.
Meanwhile, Buttigieg congratulated Sanders for the victory.
I want to congratulate my competitors and their supporters on their campaigns here in New Hampshire. I admired Senator Sanders when I was a high school student. I respect him greatly to this day, and I congratulate him on his strong showing tonight.
Technology entrepreneur Andrew Yang and Colorado Senator Michael Bennet both dropped out of the race. The next stop in the Democratic Party journey to November is the Nevada caucus on February 22nd.
Well, in New York, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has rejected the U.S. Middle East plan, calling it a gift to Israel. Speaking to the United Nations Security Council, he described the proposal as an Israeli-American plan to end the question of Palestine.
President Donald Trump's so-called peace plan for the Middle East has sparked outrage among Palestinians. As protests against the plan are going on in Palestine, President Mahmoud Abbas slammed the self-declared deal of the century at the UN Security Council. Abbas said the plan will splinter the Palestinian lands and never bring lasting peace to the region. Brandishing a large map of a future Palestine as laid out by Trump, Abbas denounced it as a Swiss cheese deal.
It was rejected by us because it considers that East Jerusalem is no longer under the sovereignty of the state of Palestine. That alone is enough for us to reject this plan. It leaves Palestine fragmented without any control on our land, air, and sea.
Meanwhile, tens of thousands of Palestinians marched against the peace plan across Hebron, Ramallah, and Gaza cities. Israeli troops fired tear gas as protesters burned tires in Al-Bireh.
Palestinians are the ones who get to decide where are their borders and their lands. This is our land and this is our right. Trump or anyone other than Trump don't have the right to give away 1 inch of our land for the occupation.
القوانين الدولية
The deal of the century topic should not even be discussed after today. The people's attendance here is a strong evidence that Palestinians reject the deal of the century.
EU's top diplomat Josep Borrell has warned Israel of violence if it annexes the Jordan Valley.
On topic, Israel's Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, has extended his support to the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas against the U.S. Middle East peace plan. In a press conference in New York, Olmert said Abbas is Tel Aviv's only partner for peace.
Olmert said that an Israeli-Palestinian peace requires direct negotiations between the two sides. He described Abbas as the only representative of the Palestinian people who is willing to negotiate with Israel.
He is a man of peace. He is opposed to terror. And therefore, he is the only partner that we can deal with, and it is important for me, as someone that negotiated with President Mahmoud Abbas for a long time.
Earlier, President Abbas categorically rejected the so-called peace plan at the United Nations Security Council, saying Palestine will never accept it.
Now, in other news, the U.S. Justice Department has charged 5 people in Texas and New York with conspiring to break oil sanctions on Iran. In a statement, the department said the suspects planned to buy oil from Iran and sell it to a Chinese refinery. The department charged has the 5 with 1 count of conspiracy and another of breaking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The government says defendants spent 8 months devising a scheme to violate U.S. sanctions. It said if convicted, the quintet each face a maximum sentence of 25 years and a fine of up to $1.25 million. The 5 have been named as Nicholas Haven of New York and Robert Thwaites, Nicholas Fuchs, Zhenyu Wang, and Daniel Ray Lane from Texas. The U.S. State Secretary Mike Pompeo has phoned Afghan President Ashraf Ghani and Chief Executive Abdullah. During the separate conversations, Pompeo informed both about progress in U.S. talks with the Taliban. In a series of tweets, Ghani said this is a welcome development with regards to regional peace and stability. Ghani said he was informed about the Taliban's proposal to bring a significant reduction in violence. Abdullah said current dialogue can lead to an agreement, paving the way for intra-Afghan talks. Abdullah said he appreciates the ongoing efforts and hoped the Taliban would take necessary steps towards peace. Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte has formally ended the 2-decade-old Visiting Forces Agreement with the United States. Foreign Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. said Manila sent the termination notice to the U.S. Embassy in Manila. Duterte's spokesperson said ending the VFA was a consequence of U.S. actions that undermine Filipino sovereignty and the judicial system. The decision was sparked by the revocation of a U.S. visa held by the former police chief who led Duterte's bloody war on drugs. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper called the ending of the agreement unfortunate, hoping it could be reversed or delayed. Closing the agreement complicates U.S. interests in the region in the face of growing Chinese power. The VFA underlines the overall U.S.-Philippines alliance. The termination will take effect after 180 days unless both sides agree to keep it. Moving on to China now, where the death toll from the new coronavirus has jumped to 1,113 victims, with over 44,000 infected in China. The National Health Commission says 97 people have died and 2,015 others infected in the past 24 hours.
While the number of new infections dwindle, deaths from the new coronavirus continue to rise. The World Health Organization has now named the virus COVID-19. The head of the WHO, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, says viruses could have more devastating consequences than any terrorist action.
We had to find a name that did not refer to a geographical location, an animal, an individual or group of people, and which is also pronounceable and related to the disease. Having a name matters to prevent the use of other names that can be inaccurate or stigmatizing.
In Japan, 39 more people have tested positive on the quarantined cruise ship, the Diamond Princess. It brings the total number of infections to 175. Tokyo's health ministry says testing is still underway and the number could rise.
Yesterday, we have found one official who had been quarantining on the cruise ship infected with the new coronavirus. This official was collected questionnaires from passengers on board.
With the virus spreading to 28 countries, several nations have evacuated their citizens from China, while others are becoming wary of trading with the country. White House National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien says the outbreak could affect the implementation of the Phase 1 trade deal.
Well, the EU says it will host an extraordinary meeting of health ministers tomorrow to discuss the novel coronavirus outbreak. The European Commissioner for Crisis Management says the conference will discuss the spread of the disease and the bloc's response. Meanwhile, a meeting of hundreds of top scientists is underway at the UN headquarters in Geneva to contain the spread of the disease. Earlier, WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said the virus outbreak is public enemy number one. Pakistan's Senate has passed two anti-money laundering and foreign exchange regulation bills. The legislation was approved by the National Assembly last month. The upper house sent the bills back to the National Assembly with some amendments. The legislation will increase the jail term for money laundering from 1 to 10 years. It will also increase the potential fine from 1 million rupees to 5 million. I'll be back after this break with plenty more news. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Protests, sit-ins and rallies have continued across India against the controversial Citizenship Act since December 12th. 27 people have been killed in mass protests against the ruling BJP's controversial act. The demonstrators have refused to end protests until the withdrawal of the new law, largely considered anti-Muslim. Hundreds of Aligarh Muslim University students took out a candlelight march in protest against police action on Jamia Millia students. The all-women sit-ins continue in Delhi's Shaheen Bagh, Mumbai Bagh and Lucknow despite an armed attack. Staying in India, the ruling BJP's recent massive defeat in New Delhi elections is rallying opposition parties together. Top leadership says the defeat shows India has rejected Prime Minister Narendra Modi's politics of hate. In Delhi Assembly polls, Aam Aadmi Party thumped Bharatiya Janata Party by winning 62 of 70 seats. The Congress leader P. Chidambaram said people of Delhi have defeated polarizing, divisive and dangerous agenda of the BJP. The West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee said leaders using faith to legitimize hate speech should take a cue from this defeat. The former Chief Minister of occupied Kashmir, Mehbooba Mufti, said Delhi has rejected vitriolic, divisive politics. In other news, Britain has asked the UN Security Council to vote on a resolution supporting a ceasefire in Libya today. The vote will be the first binding text adopted since fighting flared in April last year. The vote will be the first binding text adopted since fighting flared in April last year. Last week, a draft resolution on the Libyan ceasefire was also presented in the Council, but it was rejected by Russia. Moscow blocked the draft due to inclusion of the word mercenary in the text. Meanwhile, the Libyan parliament has called on the UN's Libya mission not to put the constitution draft up for discussion in future talks. The parliamentarians said neither the UN nor any other body have the right to approve or reject the constitution. In Lebanon, the new government has won a vote of confidence in parliament while protesters tried to block the session and clashed with security forces. Hundreds of people were injured as riot police fired tear gas at the protesters. The Lebanese Red Cross said 373 people were treated during day-long demonstrations. The parliament voted on a government policy statement saying it needed to take painful steps to address the financial crisis. Speaking before the vote, Prime Minister Hassan Diab described his government's task as a suicide mission.
We must be honest and acknowledge that the risk of collapsing is unfortunately not imaginary. We want to save the country, but we cannot complete this suicide mission if the ones standing behind us are waiting for the moment to push us over the edge without a salvage rope.
Now, protesters have been demonstrating since last October over the worsening economy and the ruling political class. Let's move on now to North Macedonia, where Parliament has unanimously approved an agreement to make the country a NATO member. A NATO flag was later raised in front of the Parliament building in Skopje during a short ceremony. President Stevo Pendarovski said the final stage to North Macedonia's NATO membership has begun. Prime Minister Oliver Spasovski also called the day historic, saying the country will become part of the world's most important security alliance. Spasovski said Greece was the first NATO member to ratify the country's NATO membership. Spain is the only state yet to signal its approval. The accession protocol must be ratified by all 29 members. In the UK, an emergency terror law has been presented to Parliament to end the release of convicted terrorists on parole. The law was drawn up after the Streatham attack in South London earlier this month. MPs will vote on the Terrorist Offenders Bill before the Commons goes into recess tomorrow. It will then move to the Lords, with the government hoping it becomes law by February 27th. On February the 2nd, an attacker stabbed 2 people in London, days after he was set free halfway through his prison term. Justice Minister Robert Buckland says action needs to be taken.
Yesterday's appalling incident makes the case plainly for immediate action. We cannot have the situation, as we saw tragically in yesterday's case, where an offender, a known risk to innocent members of the public, is released early by automatic process of law.
The British government had already set out plans for tougher sentences following another ex-prisoner killing 2 people near London Bridge in November. Now, the death toll from Storm Kira, which is battering Europe, has risen to 7 on its journey east. The storm has closed transport and left hundreds of thousands without power. In northern France, the storm cut power to 130,000 homes. 35,000 households in northern Austria have also been left without electricity. Over 700 flights in 4 German cities, including Frankfurt and Dusseldorf, have been cancelled. Storm Kira, called Storm Sabine in parts of Europe, has forced schools to close across Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands. Eight people have died in Bolivia as heavy rains sparked floods and mudslides. Civil defense authorities say 50 homes were destroyed by the landslips. Officials say torrential rains flooded rivers in areas including La Paz, Santa Cruz, and Potosi. The seasonal downpour has affected 250 families. In the disaster's aftermath, residents are scouring their broken homes for belongings. The annual rainy season in Bolivia begins in November and runs until March. The EU says 33% of its citizens were victims of cyber attacks in 2019. In its most recent report, the EU statistical authority Eurostat says 25% of all attacks were espionage. 12% were attempts to boost website traffic. Eurostat says password harvesting using fraudulent messages and the use of fake websites to steal personal information are the most frequent. It said people in Denmark experienced the most security-related problems at 50%. They were followed by France on 46%, Sweden with 45%, and Malta and the Netherlands with 42% each. It noted the EU will continue to focus on making the internet safer and better. In the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, a sculptor has begun a campaign to raise awareness on the importance of recycling. For his part, he reworks metal scrap into art with a message.
Two life-size lions crafted from scrap metal guard the entrance to studio of sculptor Kioko Mwitiki. Nearby sits a leopard besides a giant elephant sculpture. Over 30 years, Mwitiki has reworked thousands of tons of discarded metal collected from supermarkets and factories into wildlife artifacts. He says he does it to combat pollution, overconsumption, and climate change.
Recycling now has become a very important issue because, you just need to be really in sync with what is happening. All this plastic in the air, all this plastic in the ocean, and also the whole idea of Africa being in a very unique place. We are on the receiving end of a lot of pollution in the world.
Mwitiki has built lion sculptures with animal snares used by illegal hunters and poachers in national parks. He believes the choice of materials helps to draw attention to wildlife conservation.
I grew up in an area where the migration was coming through, the wildlife migration, in a place called Kajiado. That part of the migration does not exist anymore because if you study migration patterns, there was a pattern that used to go up north from Tanzania to Namanga through Kajiado back into the Mara.
To grow his campaign, Mwitiki trains young artists who want to get involved in similar recycling schemes.
European markets are trading higher after China recorded its lowest number of new coronavirus cases since January. Investors are buying back underpriced stocks as major shares track the global rally. Frankfurt's DAX is trading 0.75% higher. London's FTSE 100 and the CAC 40 in Paris each gained ground on a surge in oil shares. In Asia, the Shanghai Composite and Hong Kong's Hang Seng led the gains, closing nearly 1% higher. The Nikkei 225 also gained 0.75% as shares of the index heavyweight SoftBank Group leapt 12%. Meanwhile, prices of international Brent crude surged nearly 2.5% as slowdown in Covid-19 cases eased fuel demand concerns. Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. And there you have it. You're all caught up. Thank you for watching this bulletin here on Indus News.